So I haven't been entirely honest with you guys. There's something I haven't told you yet, and it's something that might just get me cancelled by the entire tech YouTube community. And it's this. When it comes to PC enclosures, I have always been a form over function kind of guy, buying cases that look amazing and make the least noise regardless of airflow. I know, reprehensible stuff. And because of that, instead of just buying cases with decent airflow right out of the box, I always end up removing the front panel of my cases to improve airflow, which then obviously makes them noisier and uglier, defeating the entire purpose. But today I put a stop to this lunacy. And that's because today I'll be reviewing Phanteks P300A, a very budget-friendly, airflow-focused monster that's also pretty easy on the eyes. But before that, if you're in South Africa and you're looking for the absolute best place to buy all your tech stuff, including the P300A, look no further than Wootware. I've been buying from Wootware for many years now, and every time I do, it's a friggin' phenomenal experience. Great product selection, super user-friendly website, and a support team that puts literally any other support team in the entire world to shame. Hear that, Telcom? Shame! In all seriousness, I absolutely love Wootware, and I really appreciate them sending the P300A over to the channel for me to check out. So go ahead and show them some love, even if you're not in South Africa. Now, I've been a pretty big fan of Phanteks for a really long time now. In fact, I thought their P400S was so nice, I went ahead and bought it twice. Once in black and then a year or two later in white. So safe to say I was pretty friggin' hyped to get my hands on the P300A. It shares a very similar aesthetic to the P400 range, which I'm obviously quite the fan of, but with a much more serious focus on thermal performance. And the bulk of that performance is obviously due to the case's most standout feature, a fine metallic front mesh panel which should remove airflow obstructions almost entirely from the front of the case. But we'll get a little more into thermal performance in just a bit. At just $60 or 1,100 Rand at Wootware, the P300A is extremely competitive, especially since it's one of the very few cases with a front mesh panel that doesn't look absolutely abhorrent. It's a fairly compact mid-tower that makes the most of its slightly more limited space by supporting up to eATX motherboards up to 275mm wide, along with supporting pretty much any consumer-grade graphics card ever made. It's primarily built out of steel, with the only things not made from steel being the plastic borders on the front panel, plastic internal hard drive cages, and the tempered glass side panel. And thanks to the design Phanteks has almost perfected at this point, the build quality of the entire thing is as impressive as always. There's pretty much no part of this chassis that feels flimsy, not even the perforated front mesh panel, which actually surprised me a little because front mesh panels tend to be a little on the flimsy side. Along with being quite a solid case, it's also a rather beautiful one. I mentioned before that I was already a fan of Phanteks' case designs, and the same definitely applies here. The black finish combined with smooth rounded edges make the case look professional and modern, letting it blend into whatever surrounding it's in, which is something I really appreciate. Almost as much as I appreciate that along with all that, it still has a distinctive personality thanks to the tempered glass panel, the light strip and classy Phanteks logo on the side, and of course that massive grille that makes it clear that this thing is built for performance. I also love just how compact this thing is. Coming from my gigantic NZXT H700i, moving my system into this thing freed up so much of my desk space that it felt like a breath of fresh air. The case features support for two 3.5-inch drives, along with mounting points for two 2.5-inch drives, although only one bracket is included in the box. Just note that the 3.5-inch drive bays are positioned in a way where you're kind of forced to route your cables to the front of the case behind the front panel, and something about that just doesn't feel quite right. Front I/O is about what you'd expect, and nothing more. With a power and reset button, headphone out and mic in ports, and two USB 3.0 ports. I would have personally loved to see even just one extra USB port thrown in there. And I'm not gonna lie, the lack of a USB-C port does sting just a little bit. But to be fair, none of the cases I've ever owned had a front panel USB connector, so can't knock them for that. Radiator and fan support is a bit of a mixed bag too. At the rear we have the standard 120mm fan support, while at the top we only have a single mounting point supporting up to a 140mm fan. I feel like with a small redesign like repositioning the front panel connectors, Phanteks could have easily added support for 240mm rads at the top. Although I do understand the tooling to make that happen would have boosted the price of the case quite a bit, which wouldn't have been, ideal. Luckily, the front has us covered on that front, featuring support for 120, 240, and 280mm radiators, along with either two 120 or two 140mm fans. And honestly, you don't really need any more than that. because you're not going to be building a custom liquid lube in this thing, even though that would be really dope to see. What isn't dope is that we still haven't gotten to the airflow performance of this very performance-focused case, so let's go ahead and fix that right now. For each test, I ran IDA64 CPU stress test along with MSI's combustor software for 30 minutes to stress both CPU and GPU simultaneously. I also manually set case, CPU, and GPU fan speeds to 100%, just to remove as many variables as possible and ensure that the system isn't trying to pull something shady. And for the first test, I ran the system with only the one exhaust fan it came with, and the results were pretty much what I expected, with CPU maxing out at 66 degrees Celsius and GPU landing at 68 degrees. Those temps aren't bad at all, but they're definitely not the lowest I've ever seen with the system. I was curious to see just how much air was actually being blocked by the mesh front panel, so I tested again with the panel removed, which is basically the most ideal airflow situation possible. And unsurprisingly, it turns out that yes, even mesh front panels do block some air, since with the panel removed, we saw a 5-degree drop in CPU temps down to 61 degrees, and a 7-degree drop in GPU temps down to 61 degrees as well. Next, I reran the test with an additional fan in the front positioned in line with our CPU, and we got some interesting results. CPU maxed out at 61 degrees, matching our result from the front panel remove test, and GPU maxed out at 65 degrees, 4 more than with no front panel, and 3 degrees lower than our stock configuration. This means that with just one additional fan, we got our CPU temps down to what it was with the front panel removed, and I can guarantee that if the fan was positioned in line with our GPU instead, its temps would have been a heck of a lot lower as well. With that in mind, I dropped yet another fan into the configuration, leaving us with 2 front intakes and 1 rear exhaust, and holy crap did we find the sweet spot. GPU temps were significantly lower, with fresh air being blown right in its face, maxing out at just 56 degrees. But I was even more impressed by how our CPU temp looked. On CPU, we saw an absolutely massive drop of 11 degrees Celsius. Now that's the kind of performance I was hoping to see from this case. One thing to note here is that, just like pretty much any other case with a mesh front panel, things do get a little noisy once fans ramp up to about 60% or so. But luckily, thanks to its amazing cooling performance, that won't happen all that often. And even if it does, well, that's just kind of the price you have to pay for this level of performance. Anyway, I wasn't expecting CPU temps to drop nearly as much as they did in this configuration, but I guess it does kind of make sense since the GPU isn't sending all of its hot air straight into the CPU cooler anymore. Unfortunately, even though that result is shockingly good, it does also shine a pretty big spotlight on the P300A's biggest weakness. Just one fan is not enough. The biggest selling point of this case by far is its phenomenal airflow. But to put it plainly, you're not getting that, at least not right out of the box. In order to get to that level, you'll have to go out and buy 2 additional fans. Fans that will cost you a heck of a lot more than they would cost Phanteks if they had just included them in the box. And sure, I get that a lot of people like myself have fans laying around that they can just toss into the case, or plan on buying fans anyway, but I'd wager that the majority of people won't. And that's really disappointing because this case has such massive airflow potential that I'd really hate to see go to waste like that. But even with all that in mind, I still can't help but recommend the P300A anyway. Yes, only getting a single fan sucks. And yeah, I would have liked more front panel options. And sure, the radiator support could have been better. And heck, while we're at it, I would have loved if the light strip on the side was actually RGB. But for $60 or 1,100 Rand, it's a gorgeous, very well built and thought out, easy to build in, potential airflow masterpiece that almost makes complaining about all of that other stuff just seem trivial. What isn't trivial is all of you guys for sticking around and watching this video. So if you enjoyed it, hit the like button, get subscribed, and hit me up in the comments and let me know if you're actually planning on getting a P300A for your build. And again, the biggest of props to Wootware for supporting the channel and making this entire video happen. If you're in South Africa, definitely check them out at the link below. You won't be disappointed. And yeah, I hope you're all keeping on, and I'll catch you in the next video. Cheers!